What if I told you the true power of ancient Rome wasn't just its legions or emperors, but a hidden network beneath your feet? Imagine thousands of miles of secret tunnels, undiscovered for centuries, holding the key to Rome's unprecedented rise and enduring legacy. These aren't just myths, they're real, and they hold secrets that could rewrite history. Forget everything you thought you knew about ancient Rome. Beneath the Colosseum, the Forum, and bustling modern streets lies an entirely different city, a labyrinth of undiscovered tunnels. Join us as we venture into this hidden underworld, uncovering the engineering marvels and strategic secrets that allowed Rome to conquer and control a vast empire, shadows beneath. So here's the question that will guide us tonight. Could Rome's quiet, subterranean arteries, its sewers, cryptic corridors, aqueduct galleries, mines, and siege tunnels be the empire's most overlooked weapon? And if so, who built this world in the dark and at what cost? Stand where tourists swarm the Forum. Listen, the sandals, the laughter, the honking of scooters. But underneath, there's a constant murmur, a low, distant rush like a crowded theater whispering. That sound is the Cloaca Maxima, Rome's ancient great sewer, still alive, still moving, still working after more than 2,000 years. It doesn't boast, it doesn't gleam, it waits in the dark and does its job. Rome loved spectacle, but it mastered what no one sees. Across the city, beneath the marble and myths, an unseen network spreads like roots, cryptoportici, long vaulted corridors hidden under palaces on the Palatine, channeled servants, guards, and messages, all without the public gaze. Beneath the Colosseum, a honeycomb of chambers, cages, and shafts. The hypogeum sent beasts and men bursting into the arena through trapdoors as if conjured by magic. On the city's edges, aqueduct galleries, narrow, high tunnels carved through rock, carried water with a gradient so perfect that even gravity seemed disciplined by Roman order. And under Rome's feet a second city grew. The catacombs, corridors for the dead carved into soft tufa, stretching for hundreds of kilometers. Silent, patient, a city that remembers these were the silent sentinels of empire. But their story doesn't end at the city's boundary. From Eboracum in Britain to Carthage in North Africa, from the ports of Spain to the hills of Judea, Rome tunneled, lined, vaulted, and drained. It dug mines for gold and iron. It cut quarries into the bones of mountains. It sunk shafts every few dozen paces to ventilate and align long underground galleries. Tunneling was not an exception. It was a system, it was policy, it was power, and it was brutal work. Picture a line of men under torchlight, bodies slick with sweat, lungs filling with chalky dust. Iron picks, dolabra, beat a steady rhythm into tufa and pozzolana. The lamps flicker, the air grows thin. You learn to watch the flame like a heartbeat. When it burned steady, you were fine. When it leaned and guttered, you were too deep, too tight, too late. A foreman whispers to halt. Everyone leans into the dark, listening. Somewhere, far down the line, another team is digging toward you. If your angles are wrong, your tunnel will miss, and the mountain will laugh. Roman engineers did not have lasers or GPS. They had the groma, a simple cross of arms with hanging plumb lines. They had the chorobates, a long wooden level with water channels to find the perfect fall for a stream. They had rope, chalk, a knack for reading stone, and they had time and the lives of men to spend. We can still trace their method. Work teams attacked a mountain from both sides at once, sinking vertical shafts down like needles and chewing through the earth toward each other by lamplight. Sometimes, miraculously, they met with barely a hand's width of error. When they misjudged, men died in cave-ins or vanished in collapses the rock swallowed whole. They learned to shore the ceilings with timber and to skin them with brick and mortar. Opus caementicium, Roman concrete, mixed with volcanic ash that hardened underwater, an invention that felt like cheating the gods. Consider the Cloaca Maxima. Laid out in the early days of the Republic, it wasn't a sewer at first. It was a drainage tunnel, a stone throat to swallow the marsh where the Forum would rise. But the Romans improved it, lined it, arched it, connected neighborhood drains and private latrines, and turned it into the spinal cord of urban sanitation. Water, waste, and storm runoff all vanished into a darkness that meant the city could breathe, or the monumental Fucine Tunnel under Emperor Claudius. An entire lake, Fucinus, rebuked with a mountain pierced by a tunnel so the waters could pass. 11 years, 30,000 men, dozens of shafts sunk straight down to gnaw sideways until the galleries kissed and the mountain finally surrendered. The lake receded. The emperor smiled. A message was carved into earth and water. Rome decides where rivers go. And all the while beneath the glitter of empire, corridors multiplied. But the underworld was not just plumbing and pride. It was strategy. Wars are won in silence before a trumpet ever sings. The Romans knew it. Their generals recorded it. Their enemies feared it. Siege warfare in the ancient world was ugly, ingenious, and intimate. Walls were not just battered, they were undermined. Sappers crept to the base of a city's fortifications and tunneled beneath the foundations, propping the void with thick timbers. When the time was right, they soaked those beams with pitch and oil, set them alight, and ran. Fire ate wood. Stone sagged. Walls cracked and collapsed in a thunder of dust and screams. Inside the city, the defenders listened with their cheeks pressed to the ground, hunting the faint scratch of picks below their feet. When they heard it, they dug counter-tunnels and fought in the dark like animals, blind and gasping as smoke crawled through the earth. Archaeology at places like Dura-Europos on the eastern frontier preserves the horror, bodies tangled in tunnels, faces turned black with the residue of burned bitumen and sulfur. Subterranean war is close range. Every breath is borrowed. The Romans did not invent mining warfare, but they refined it. Their manuals, Vegetius, Frontinus, record stratagems older than the empire itself, sneak through a city by its hidden drains, block aqueducts to choke a garrison, flood a tunnel to drown sappers, and sometimes they turn their enemies' pride against them. Listen to Livy, writing of the capture of Veii in the 4th century BCE. The Etruscan city sat fat and confident behind its walls, with a temple of Juno crowning the height. The Romans didn't storm the gates. They dug. A tunnel slid under the city like a knife. On the day chosen for assault, a band of soldiers surfaced within the temple itself, rising from the sacred underfloor, as if the goddess had birthed them from the earth. The gates were opened from within, a legend, perhaps, but it reveals a truth. Rome understood the psychology of the underworld. If you came from beneath, you came from nowhere. Even when the Romans weren't at war, their tunnels served strategy, control water, and you control people. The aqueducts that delivered abundance to the capital could also be shut, diverted, or rationed by the curator aquarum, the water commissioner, men like Sextus Julius Frontinus under Nerva. He audited illegal taps, punished thieves, and decided who drank how much. He knew every conduit, every inspection shaft, every maze beneath the city. In a society where riots could begin over bread and water, Subterranean knowledge was a governor's crown. In palaces, cryptoportici allowed emperors to move without being seen. Imagine the year is Jucherloop CE. The Emperor Domitian, a man who trusts walls more than people, in his vast palace on the Palatine. Above, colonnades sing of power. Below, shadowed corridors connect reception halls, bathhouses, service rooms, and gardens in a network only a handful truly understood. Guards pace by torchlight. Messages pass from chamber to chamber under the feet of courtiers. In the dark, emperors were safer, or they hoped they were. Even spectacles turned to strategy. The Colosseum's hypogeum taught coordination, deception, and split-second control. 100 trapdoors timed to heartbeats. Elevators cranked by teams of men hauled cages up with a violence that rattled bone. Stage managers, of a sort, learned to move living cargo through tight spaces without jamming, to predict failure points, to rehearse chaos. Then those same men went home and helped build the city's other veins. you know. But for the most part, Rome's tunnelers were not citizens with careers. They were slaves, prisoners, debtors, the economically desperate. They dug, they shored up, and they died with little more legacy than a mason's mark scratched into wet mortar. Some left graffiti, a name, an obscene joke, a prayer to a minor god of crossings. The underworld kept their secrets. Time kept the rest. Centuries passed. Streets rose as debris piled up. Emperors fell. Barbarians camped in basilicas. Popes turned amphitheaters into quarries. Medieval houses rooted themselves into the stone ribs of antique vaults. The past layered over itself like sediment. The tunnels down below stayed, waiting, forgotten by design, and then one day, a worker in modern Rome lifts an iron lid. Warm air breathes up from a black hole in the street. A camera slips down on a line, its light rolling like a coin across wet stone. Walls curve away into darkness. There, brick stamps brick stamps dating to an emperor's reign. Here, white mineral drapery, calcium, rippling like frozen silk. A Roman tunnel, still perfect, as if the workers just took a meal break and never came back. In the last few decades, archaeologists, engineers, and, yes, speleologists have been crawling back into Rome's underworld. Laser scanners hum in the quiet. Sandy reconstructions give back volume to forgotten spaces. Ground-penetrating radar maps absences in the earth like ghosts. And the results are staggering. As Rome digs new subway lines, like the Metro C, the ground opens its hand and shows what it has been hiding: sections of ancient drains no one has touched since emperors were crowned, vaulted corridors under forums, and entire subterranean service networks beneath bath complexes, where hot water once roared in copper pipes and slaves jogged through scalded air to feed furnaces that made emperors sweat. Naples, the old Roman aqueduct and cisterns, cut deep into soft volcanic tufa, form a subterranean city so vast you can lose your sense of direction in minutes. Wells become star fields when you look up from below. In Ostia and Carthage, underground warehouses and cool storage rooms remind us that food was a weapon, and it was kept in the dark. The hypogeum of the Colosseum, long silted and buried, has been excavated and deciphered, revealing the tracks of the crews who ran it like a machine. Modern walkways dare you to imagine the noise: pulleys creaking, ropes slapping, men grunting, animals screaming, and above, a city roaring for blood. And then you step back into sunlight and hear only traffic and crows elsewhere. Collapse exposes hidden worlds. A sinkhole opens in a quiet Roman courtyard and reveals a flight of stairs that disappeared centuries ago, dropping into an old spicus, the covered channel of an aqueduct, still lined with an ancient waterproof plaster, opus signum, red and tough with crushed tile. The lamps flicker. The air smells of stone and old water. On the wall, a simple scratched line and a date, not in our calendar, but there's proof that someone stood on that spot when the empire breathed. It is not just Rome. Surveyors in Britain trace drains beneath Roman forts laid with soldierly precision. In Judea, rebels hid in caves and tunnels during the Bar Kokhba revolt, forcing Roman troops to smoke them out chamber by chamber. In Gaul and Spain, Roman mines leave behind a labyrinth of galleries where the empire pulled gold and iron out of mountains, feeding its economy in a cycle of extraction that turned hills into hollow corpses. By studying the places where stone bit back, we learn the limits of Roman will and its astonishing reach. What makes these discoveries more than curiosities is what they reveal about Roman priorities. The above-ground Rome, the triumphal arches, the imperial forums, the statues, and the golden roofs was performance. The underground Rome was practice, it was logistics, it was administration, it was the discipline that made conquest stick. Roads carried soldiers, tunnels carried control. When a city rebelled, you could shut its water. When an enemy hunkered behind walls, you could pull the ground out from beneath them. When you needed to move without being seen, you slid through corridors where sunlight never entered. When plague or filth threatened, the sewers took it away. When you needed to feed 100,000 mouths, cool granaries hidden under warehouses kept grain from rotting. People like to think empire is spectacle. It is also infrastructure. And yet, why is this story so often untold? Because the human cost is uncomfortable. Because the names of the men who dug, because the human cost is uncomfortable. Because the names of the men who dug are gone. Because marble sings, and because history loves a hero with a sword, not a laborer with a pick and bad light. But listen to the echoes that come to us. A Roman engineer, Flavius, a name like any other, stands in a narrow tunnel with his hand on the wall. The lime plaster is still damp. Good. He rubs his thumb over a stamp in the brick, a tile factory out on the Via Latina. He feels the pull of air toward a shaft. The draft is steady, excellent. He sends a boy with a tablet to the surface to measure gradient. He squints into the dark where the chalk line vanishes and says quietly, 2 more cubits. His voice is calm, but he knows one bad call brings a ceiling down and buries a dozen men. And his career with it, a sapper in a siege, crouches in the heat, listening to the slow crackle as fire eats the props holding up a wall. The ground above his head whispers. The men are already running out. He feels the shift through his feet, stone waking up. He runs. The tunnel belches smoke and grit as the city's proud defense slumps into itself with a groan. He does not cheer. He coughs till he sees stars. Then he goes where he is told. A modern archaeologist squeezes through a low arch under a Renaissance palace. Her glove squeaks on wet stone. She swings the flashlight and the beam stops on letters, a name, and a rude sketch that hasn't seen the sun in 1800 years. She smiles. For a moment she can smell the oil of the lamp that wrote it. She whispers the name so the dark remembers. And in the Colosseum shadow, crowds pass over the place where if you were to cut a window in the earth, you would watch tracks worn by feet that never saw daylight. Everywhere, Rome still has a second pulse. Was this the empire's secret weapon? Yes. And not because it made generals clever, because it made command real. You know, a city that moves water through mountains can move food through deserts. A state that keeps 1 million people alive on purpose can also starve a province on purpose. The power to hide your movement, to flood your enemy, to steal air, to erase filth, to vanish and emerge later where no one expects you. That is power with a permanence swords do not have. The tunnels were Rome's restraint and Rome's ruthlessness given stone, and somehow we forgot, or we chose to. Every empire tries to write its story in light. Rome also wrote in shadow. The underworld was not an afterthought. It was the point. It is still down there, dark and patient, built by hands that history rarely invites to the banquet. A network that bent rivers, burrowed through hills, turned cities inside out, and taught the state to think like stone. So the next time you step onto a Roman road and marvel at how straight it runs, ask yourself what's below. Somewhere under you is a tunnel you will never see, doing a job you never think about. The perfect servant, silent, efficient, enduring. And somewhere in that dark a name is scratched into plaster by a man who never saw the sky at work, whose sweat mortared the empire. Rome conquered the world in public. It kept it in private. We walk in the sun. The empire's real genius, perhaps its most unsettling genius, still whispers from under our feet. If you listen, if you dare to listen, you can hear it.